Have you ever been in a situation where, well, where things in your life are going genuinely uncharacteristically well? I mean, I want you to really picture this for a second.
Oh, yeah, I think we all know that feeling.
Right. Like, maybe it's a brand new romantic relationship, and the person you're seeing is, they're actually kind. They actually text back. When they say they will, their behavior matches their words. Or maybe it's a new, deep friendship you formed.
Or even just a phenomenal new job, where your boss is actually supportive and the work is fulfilling.
Exactly. Everything is smooth. You're just cruising along. There are no immediate crises. And yet, instead of feeling happy or relieved or, at peace, you feel this creeping, suffocating dread.
Yeah, that tension.
You wake up on a perfectly sunny Sunday morning, your partner's making coffee in the kitchen, and you have this quiet, terrifying certainty in your gut that, well, the shoe's about to drop.
It's that visceral sensation of bracing for impact when there is absolutely nothing in the sky. I mean, you aren't just waiting for a catch. You are actively hunting for an invisible catch because your body just refuses to believe that safety is real.
Yes, hunting for it. And the wild part is, the better things get, the louder those internal alarm bells ring.
Yeah.
Like, the safer the environment, the more dangerous it feels.
Right, which makes no sense logically.
Exactly. So, welcome to Today on the Hypothesis. Our mission in this segment is to completely decode the hidden, often really frustrating architecture of human relationships and human survival. We are diving deep into a synthesized research paper today. It's titled The Cycle of the Abandoned, put together by independent researcher Victor H. Sertouche.
It's an incredible synthesis, really.
It really is. The goal of our deep dive today is to unpack this really fascinating multidimensional hypothesis that takes everything we think we know about self-sabotage and just flips it entirely on its head.
Which is such a necessary reframing. Because if you are the person who constantly feels that looming dread, or, if you find yourself blowing up good relationships when they get too close, the societal narrative is usually pretty harsh.
Oh, absolutely.
You'll get told you have commitment issues or that you're just a self-saboteur.
Or that you're just broken. Like, why can't you just be happy?
Exactly, yeah. And the reason you should care about the research we're looking at today is that understanding this specific cycle does something profoundly important. It removes the shame.
Wow, yeah.
It takes that relationship anxiety and reframes it. This hypothesis argues that what you're experiencing is not a character flaw. It's not an emotional quirk. It's an incredibly brilliant, ancient biological system doing exactly what it was designed to do, which is to keep you alive.
Keep you alive. I love that.
Yeah, it's a survival mechanism wired into your neurobiology, written into your DNA, and in many cases, literally passed down to you through generations.
Okay, I want to get right into the mechanics of this. Because Sertouche's hypothesis starts with something called a biological bind. And understanding this bind is, well, it's the skeleton key to the entire phenomenon.
It really is the core of it.
Right. So the research suggests that every single human being operates on two fundamental, non-negotiable biological drives. First, we have a drive to connect with others for security. And second, we have a drive to survive physical and emotional threats.
And if you had a relatively secure, safe upbringing, those two drives operate in perfect harmony. I mean, they're essentially the same.
Because connection is survival, right?
Exactly. For an infant, connection literally equals survival. You cry, a caregiver comes, they feed you, they soothe you. So the brain wires itself to understand that moving toward another human being is the safest thing you can do in a dangerous world.
But I'm guessing that for someone who experienced early childhood abandonment,
Yeah.
whether that was physical absence or severe emotional neglect or an unpredictable, volatile parent, those two drives just don't work together at all.
They don't just fail to work together, they are at absolute war with each other. I mean, if your original source of safety, the giant in the room who is supposed to provide your food and shelter, is simultaneously your source of terror, or if their availability is just completely erratic, your developing brain is essentially forced to divide by zero.
Divide by zero. That's a great way to put it.
Because you desperately need this person to survive, but getting close to this person might destroy you.
So intimacy itself gets neurologically conflated with a lethal threat. The brain learns that closeness is just the precursor to devastation.
Precisely. And that biological bind, the war between needing connection and fearing destruction, creates what this research defines as the tripartite relational cycle.
Okay, the 3 stages.
Right. It's a highly predictable 3-stage rhythm that a survivor unconsciously falls into when they try to engage with another person in adulthood. And the very first stage of the cycle is all about hypercaution. It's termed the architecture of caution and hypervigilant scouting.
Scouting. Like a military reconnaissance mission before you send in the troops.
That is a very accurate way to look at it, because when someone with this background enters a new relationship, they aren't just feeling the normal, mild butterflies of a first date.
Right. It's not just first date jitters.
No, not at all. They are engaging in intense social scouting. They're in a state of high alert, constantly tense, and fundamentally on guard.
I want to make this really concrete for you listening, because the research highlights that in this stage, the survivor is processing an incomprehensible amount of social data per second.
Oh, massive amounts.
Yeah, they're analyzing the tiniest micro-expressions on your face. They're registering a half-octave shift in your tone of voice. Like, if you take 3 hours to respond to a text message when you normally take 1 hour, their brain isn't thinking, oh, they must be busy at work.
Nope.
Their brain is screaming, the pattern has changed, danger is imminent, they are preparing to leave.
Because to that person's nervous system, a changed pattern isn't just a quirk of the afternoon. It's the footprint of an incoming predator. I mean, they're analyzing all this data to find hidden dangers, to spot the rejection before it happens, so they are never caught off guard the way they were as a helpless child.
But honestly, living like that sounds completely exhausting. Like you're maintaining an escape route at all times.
It is exhausting.
You keep the partner at arm's length. You probably pride yourself on being fiercely, impenetrably independent. Like, I don't need anyone.
But that independence is an illusion. It isn't true self-sufficiency. It's a preemptive defense mechanism against the terrifying prospect of needing someone and being dropped.
Okay, so that is stage one, the scouting phase.
Yeah.
But eventually people do get into relationships. So what happens? Do they just keep scouting forever?
Well, no.
Because the hypothesis notes a transition into stage two, which it calls the all-in phase. But I'm really struggling to see how a brain that is that terrified of connection suddenly flips a switch and just goes all in.
It's a phenomenal question, and the transition mechanism is crucial here. The brain doesn't just decide to trust. What happens is that stage, the hypervigilant scouting, is metabolically and emotionally exhausting.
Right, you can't keep that up.
Exactly. You cannot run your nervous system at 110% capacity forever. So eventually, the sheer loneliness and the exhaustion of keeping those massive walls up becomes just too much to bear.
Makes sense.
When the attraction is overwhelming or the partner passes enough tests, the survivor hits a breaking point. The walls don't just lower gracefully, they completely collapse.
The total collapse of boundaries.
Yes, and this transition throws them into a state of limerence.
Limerence.
Yeah, limerence is not love. It's an intense, highly intrusive state of infatuation. It's characterized by obsessive thinking, an overwhelming desire for reciprocation, and massive emotional dependency. It's a pendulum swing from extreme distance to extreme enmeshment.
The source material actually brings in clinical psychologist Pete Walker here and his concept of the abandonment melange, and I found this fascinating.
It's a great concept.
Walker describes this melange as a toxic, simmering mixture of fear, shame, and self-hatred that is constantly humming in the background of a trauma survivor's inner world. It's this deep-seated belief that they are fundamentally unlovable. And the research suggests that this sudden extreme limerence, this rushing into the all-in phase, is actually a dissociative escape.
Let's look at the function of that escape, right? Because the survivor is in deep, chronic pain from that abandonment melange.
Right.
When they finally let someone in, the rush of dopamine and the illusion of sudden closeness acts like a powerful anesthetic. They over-idealize the new partner to a dangerous degree. They project all their unmet childhood needs onto this normal, flawed human being.
They put them on a pedestal.
Exactly. They'll take completely ordinary coincidences, like enjoying the same obscure band, and interpret them as evidence of a cosmic, unbreakable soulmate connection.
Well, they have to do that, right? Because they need a justification for why they just dropped all those fierce protective defenses from stage I. It's a form of magical thinking. Like, I am safe to drop my weapons because this person isn't just a person. They're a perfect angel sent to rescue me. They're flawless. Therefore, I am finally safe.
Which is an incredibly fragile foundation for a relationship, because as the hypothesis points out, this all-in phase is entirely synthetic. It isn't actual, grounded, mutual security.
It's fake security.
It's a frantic, desperate attempt to consume security. They're trying to patch a massive internal emotional void using the external presence of someone else.
And obviously, no human being can actually fill that void perfectly. which perfectly sets the trap for stage 3, right?
Right,
The
right.
dropping shoe and the protective strike.
Yeah.
Because as the intimacy deepens in stage 2, as they get closer and closer, that very closeness starts to trigger the nervous system's original alarm.
The irony is tragic, honestly. The intimacy they desperately craved and engineered in stage 2 suddenly becomes the ultimate threat.
The research defines this feeling of the other shoe dropping not as a metaphor, but as an actual emotional flashback. Can you break down what that means in this context? Because I think people hear flashback and think of movies.
Yeah, an emotional flashback is a sudden, visceral regression. Unlike a visual flashback where you might see an image of a past event, an emotional flashback floods your body with the exact frightening, abandoned, helpless feeling states you experienced as a child.
Wow.
You feel the same terror, but without the memory attached.
Yeah.
So your brain looks around for the source of the terror, and it lands on the closest thing, which is your partner.
So even if your current partner is just reading a book on the couch and doing absolutely nothing wrong, the survivor's altered state forces them to scan for evidence that the partner is losing interest.
Right, or judging them or preparing to leave.
The tension of waiting for that inevitable abandonment becomes physically unbearable. You're waiting for the axe to fall. So what do? You initiate a protective strike?
Yeah.
You retreat.
You take control.
Exactly. The research notes this can look like severe self-sabotage. You might start a massive blowout fight over absolutely nothing just to test if the partner will stay. You might cheat. Or, very commonly, you might just abruptly end the relationship and ghost the person without warning.
By leaving first, the survivor regains absolute control over what they perceive as an unavoidable loss. It's a preemptive strike. The body is simply bracing for a blow that it believes is perpetually imminent.
Right.
If I blow up the relationship, at least I control the detonation. At least I'm not the one left standing in the rubble alone.
Okay, I want to map this out with an analogy because the mechanics here are so precise. It's like driving a highly advanced car equipped with a hypersensitive, military-grade proximity sensor.
Okay, I like this.
You are cruising down an empty, perfectly paved, safe highway. The weather is clear. There are no other cars. But your car's sensor detects a single weightless leaf floating past the front bumper. The sensor's programming says, incoming boulder. So it violently overrides your steering, slams on the anti-lock brakes, locks up the tires, and throws you into the dashboard.
And you're sitting there bruised and confused, wondering why your car just tried to kill you on an empty road.
Exactly. But the car didn't malfunction. The sensor worked flawlessly according to its programming. The problem is that the programming was calibrated for navigating an active war zone, not a quiet suburban highway.
That distinction is vital. It really is. It forces us to ask a much larger question. Why would the human brain, which is arguably the most efficient, advanced biological organ on the planet, devote so much energy to building and maintaining such a stressful, exhausting, hyperreactive system?
Right. Because if evolutionary biology is all about efficiency and survival of the fittest, this cycle seems like a massive glitch. It destroys social bonds, which humans need. But the hypothesis leans heavily into evolutionary psychiatry here, and it demands that we completely reframe how we look at these disorders.
We have to stop viewing these trauma responses as broken machinery. From a purely evolutionary standpoint, the behaviors associated with abandonment trauma are highly successful, perfectly executed adaptations to profoundly unstable environments.
To understand this, the research takes us back to our ancient ancestors. Think about hunter-gatherer societies on the savannah. In that environment, being cast out from your tribe or separated from your primary caregivers wasn't just sad.
It was a literal, immediate death sentence.
Exactly. A human infant or child cannot survive alone in the wild for more than a few days.
John Bowlby's attachment theory is foundational here. Bowlby posited that human emotional bonds weren't just nice feelings. They served as a physical haven of safety. Maintaining proximity to a protective adult was the primary survival strategy of the human species.
So imagine a child growing up in an environment where that haven of safety is deeply compromised. Maybe the parent is an alcoholic with explosive rage. Or maybe the parent is severely depressed and emotionally vacant. To survive that environment, that child's brain has to develop a precision sensor for social threats.
Which is why calling hypervigilance an evolutionary upgrade under duress is so accurate.
Wait, I have to challenge this phrasing. Calling it an evolutionary upgrade feels like a stretch.
How so?
Well, how is being terrified of your partner or ghosting someone who loves you an upgrade? It feels like we are giving people a biological excuse for treating their partners terribly.
I see what you mean. But it's an upgrade for the child in the danger zone, not for the adult in the safe apartment.
Okay, right.
Think about the child with the explosive, unpredictable father, the child who learns to read the atmospheric weather of the house. They know exactly when dad's footsteps sound a fraction too heavy on the stairs. They know that a specific sigh from mom means the plates are about to start flying.
What?
That hyper-attunement allows the child to anticipate the violence or the emotional withdrawal, hide in their room, and modify their behavior to survive the night. In a highly dangerous, unpredictable zone, the vigilant animal is the only one that survives.
Ah, okay. That makes complete sense. The child's brain optimizes for the nightmare it is currently living in. It wires itself to be a threat detection master.
But here is the tragic glitch. The problem arises 20 years later. That high-resolution sensor doesn't just power down when you turn 18 and move out of the house.
It doesn't come with an off switch.
No, it remains fully active in a completely safe adult environment. And the ancient reptilian parts of our brain, like the amygdala, fail to distinguish between a modern interpersonal conflict and a lethal predator.
This is where the science gets incredibly surreal. You're telling me that if you are listening to this and you are agonizing over a one-word text message from your partner, like you sent a long, vulnerable paragraph and they replied, okay with a period instead of an exclamation mark. Your brain is literally utilizing the exact same survival circuitry our ancestors use to evade saber-toothed tigers in the brush.
It sounds like hyperbole, but neurobiologically, that is exactly what is happening.
It's insane.
When your proximity sensor detects a shift in tone, a micro-expression of annoyance, or a delayed text, it triggers the exact same biological alarm bells as a rustling in the tall grass. Your brain assumes a threat to your life is imminent.
So running away is literally flight.
Yes, the retreat phase of the relational cycle, the ghosting, the starting of a fight, the sudden urge to run away, that is not a personality flaw. That is literally the flight or fight component of the mammalian fight or flight response. The emotional proximity of another human being is being processed by your ancient brain as a physical threat to your survival.
A precision sensor keeps a gazelle alive in the jungle. But leaving that sensor fully powered on, running at maximum voltage 24/7 while you're just trying to navigate a Tuesday night dinner with your spouse, I mean, the physical toll of that has to be monumental.
Oh, it's destructive to the body. It causes severe systemic wear and tear. And that bridges us directly into the physical hardware of this mechanism. The hypothesis doesn't just stay in the realm of psychology, it dives deep into the neurobiology of the dropping shoe.
Right.
How does the human body actually execute this survival program on a chemical level?
Right, because the feeling of the other shoe dropping is not just an anxious thought swirling around in your prefrontal cortex. It's a literal, measurable physiological event controlled by your HPA axis, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenocortical axis, and your endocrine system.
Let's break that down for clarity, because the HK axis is essentially your body's stress management command center. The hypothalamus is the radar dish detecting the threat. The pituitary gland is the dispatcher sending the signal, and the adrenal glands are the troops releasing the hormones to deal with the threat.
Okay, got it.
Under normal, healthy conditions, if a car swerves into your lane on the highway, your HPA axis instantly floods your body with cortisol and adrenaline. Your heart rate spikes, your pupils dilate, you swerve out of the way, you survive.
And then you calm down.
And then, yes, this is the key. 20 minutes later, the threat is gone, the system counter-regulates, the cortisol dissipates, and your heart rate returns to normal.
But the research highlights that childhood abandonment trauma essentially re-regulates and permanently alters these biological stress systems. It sets entirely new, faulty baselines for how your body responds to the world and specifically to intimacy.
For individuals who experience chronic childhood trauma, the initial years of abuse or neglect cause massive, unrelenting elevations in cortisol and CRH, which is corticotropin-releasing hormone. Their HPA axis is stuck in the on position.
Stuck on.
They are perpetually flooded with stress hormones. That is what causes the constant generalized arousal and the hypervigilance.
But biologically, a human body cannot sustain a 24/7 cortisol flood forever without vital organs failing, right?
Yeah.
The hypothesis introduces this concept of allostatic load. Can we unpack that?
Allostatic load is a cumulative physiological wear and tear on your biological systems due to chronic, unrelenting stress. It's the cost of constantly running your engine in the red zone. The research even points to mathematical models of this, where your allostatic load is calculated as the function of your cumulative stress over time minus the efficiency of your regulatory system.
And for someone with abandonment trauma, their regulatory efficiency, their ability to calm down, is drastically diminished because they never received that early social buffering. Like a healthy parent holding a crying infant physically teaches the infant's nervous system how to regulate. Without that, the survivor is left with chronic hyperarousal, which eventually leads to massive system fatigue.
And this leads to one of the most fascinating and paradoxical findings in modern trauma research. It's a phenomenon called cortisol blunting.
Yeah, I found this deeply counterintuitive.
Yeah.
You would logically assume that highly traumatized, highly anxious people walking around waiting for the other shoe to drop would have incredibly high cortisol levels all the time.
Right.
But the data shows the exact opposite. Research indicates that adults who are severely maltreated or abandoned as children often show significantly lower baseline cortisol levels compared to peers who had safe childhoods.
It seems backwards until you look at the body as an ultimate survival machine. The system realizes it is drowning in its own stress chemicals. To prevent the body from essentially burning its own organs to the ground from chronic cortisol exposure, the HPA axis severely downregulates.
Oh, wow.
It blunts the cortisol production. It's an emergency biological adaptation.
Like blowing a fuse in your house to stop an electrical fire.
Exactly, but it is a very costly adaptation. By artificially lowering that baseline and blunting the cortisol, the individual is left with weakened biological brakes. Their ability to appropriately counter-regulate hyperarousal in other systems is completely compromised.
So their brakes are worn down to the metal, but their accelerator, the sympathetic nervous system, the raw fight-or-flight response, is still hyper-reactive.
Which perfectly explains the intense emotional instability these survivors experience. This is why, when they get triggered by a perceived rejection, they shoot from 0 to 100 in a fraction of a second.
And they can't stop it.
No, they explode in anger or dissolve into a panic attack, and they literally do not have the biological braking system required to slow themselves back down to a baseline of calm.
If you were listening to this and you've ever felt that agonizing inability to just calm down after a minor argument with your partner, this is what is happening. Your brakes are failing. But what does this mean practically? If your alarm system is hypersensitive and your brakes are shot, how can you possibly convince your physical body that you are safe with a healthy partner? How do you just sit on the couch and rest?
It is incredibly difficult, and it becomes even clearer when we factor in the oxytocin system. Oxytocin is widely known as the bonding hormone or the cuddle chemical, but it also acts as a profound anti-stress agent in the brain.
The research explains that in early life, your HPA axis and your oxytocin system are supposed to interact constantly to shape your lifelong neurobiology. Things like early skin-to-skin contact, eye contact, and consistent nurturing from a caregiver literally build the density of your oxytocin receptors. It teaches the oxytocin system how to act as a dampener for the stress system.
But if you experienced severe physical or emotional abandonment, you were deprived of that consistent, soothing stimulation during your critical developmental windows.
So the oxytocin system just never fully develops.
Right. It remains understimulated. This creates a permanent, lifelong imbalance. The stress system always dominates the room because the oxytocin system simply isn't robust enough to challenge it.
That's heartbreaking.
It really is. This isn't just a psychological hurdle. It is a literal, measurable biological deficit. It makes it physically harder for survivors to feel a sense of peace in a relationship. Their body is biologically starved of the chemical that signals, you are safe.
That is staggering. The idea that feeling unsafe isn't just a negative thought pattern, but is quite literally dictated by a lack of hormone receptors in your brain. But Sertuche's hypothesis doesn't stop at the individual's neurobiology. It takes his entire framework to a macroscopic level that is, frankly, mind-blowing.
Right.
We move from how trauma rewires one person's brain to the intergenerational echo.
Yeah, this is where it gets huge.
How does this cycle span hundreds of years across entire human family lines? We're diving into epigenetics and assortative mating.
This is where the scope of the research becomes truly profound. The hypothesis strongly argues that the tripartite relational cycle repeats through generations, and the epigenetic data backing this up is undeniable. Epigenetics is the study of how environmental factors, like severe trauma, can write themselves into the regulation of your genes without actually altering the underlying sequence of your DNA. The primary mechanism for this is called DNA methylation.
Okay, I want to use an analogy to clarify DNA methylation because it's a dense concept.
Mm.
Let's think of your actual DNA as the physical hardware of a smartphone.
Okay.
It's the microchips, the screen, the battery. That hardware doesn't change. Epigenetics, and specifically methylation, is the software operating system running on that phone. Childhood trauma is essentially a poorly coded background app that someone secretly installed on your phone. It's constantly running, constantly scanning, and it is draining your battery to zero every single day.
I love that.
You can't see the code, you didn't change the physical hardware of the phone, but you absolutely feel the phone overheating in your hand.
That is a phenomenal way to visualize it. The DNA sequence is intact, but the expression of that DNA has been hijacked by the environment. And childhood trauma is specifically associated with massive alterations in the methylation patterns, the software coding of the genes that control that exact HPA stress axis we just dissected.
The research highlights three specific genes that are deeply affected. First is the NR3C1 gene, which is the glucocorticoid receptor gene.
And this is the gene responsible for building the receptors in your brain that detect cortisol. The hypothesis notes that severe early trauma leads to increased methylation on this gene. Going back to your analogy, the trauma writes code that actively suppresses this gene's function. The behavioral result is that your brain literally builds fewer cortisol receptors.
Which sounds incredibly dangerous.
Mm.
If you have fewer receptors, your brain has poor negative feedback. Meaning, once your stress response is triggered by a fight with your partner, your brain is blind to the cortisol flooding your system, so it doesn't know when to shut the alarm off. It's like a broken thermostat that just keeps blasting the furnace because it can't read the temperature in the room.
Exactly. Then you have the FKBP5 gene. Altered epigenetic expression of this gene drastically heightens your biological sensitivity to perceived rejection.
Wow.
Yeah, if you are the person who goes into a complete emotional tailspin when a friend leaves you on read for 3 hours, this gene is literally amplifying that pain signal in your brain. It's not you being overly dramatic. It is your cells reacting to the software they were programmed with.
And finally, the BDNF gene, which is absolutely crucial for neuroplasticity and learning. Decreased levels of BDNF lower your relational resilience. It destroys your ability to bounce back from relationship stressors or to adapt to new healthy relationship dynamics. You get stuck in the trauma loop.
But here's where the weight of this hypothesis really lands. These molecular epigenetic imprints of trauma, this altered software, doesn't just stay with you. It can be inherited by your children.
Inherited.
Yes. The paper cites landmark studies on Holocaust survivors and their offspring. Researchers found the exact same altered epigenetic methylation patterns on the FKBP5 stress response gene in the children of survivors. Children who were born years later and never directly experienced the horrors of the Holocaust themselves.
Wait, I need to pause here because this is huge. Are you saying we are chemically pre-programming our children for hypervigilance and relationship anxiety before they are even conceived?
The data strongly suggests yes. We see this heavily in prenatal programming. Maternal stress during pregnancy directly influences the intrauterine environment. Increased DNA methylation on that NR3C1 gene has been found in the umbilical cords and the cheek swabs of infants whose mothers experienced severe trauma or domestic violence while pregnant.
The research even points out that they found trauma-associated methylation patterns in human sperm, meaning a father who experiences severe abandonment trauma can pass the epigenetic predisposition for hypervigilance directly through the germline to his child. The child is born with the proximity sensor already turned up to maximum sensitivity.
But the genius of Sertuch's synthesis is that he recognizes biology doesn't act in a vacuum. The intergenerational cycle isn't just passed down through a sperm or an egg. It's actively reinforced by sociology. The hypothesis introduces the concept of assortative mating, also known as social homogamy.
This is the sociological phenomenon where humans tend to non-randomly select romantic partners who closely match their own characteristics, their own socioeconomic status, and critically, their own mental health profiles and trauma histories.
And this explains the eternal mystery of why survivors of abandonment trauma consistently struggle to maintain relationships with genuinely healthy, secure partners. What is fascinating and deeply tragic here is the magnetic pull of familiarity. For a nervous system wired by abandonment, a truly safe, predictable, emotionally available partner feels deeply uncomfortable.
Because there is no chaos to monitor.
Yeah.
If you are wired to constantly scout for danger and the environment is perfectly peaceful, your brain doesn't think, finally I can relax. Your brain thinks, this is a trick, the predator is hiding, I hate this. The safe partner literally feels boring.
Precisely. The survivor's nervous system isn't firing off those massive spikes of cortisol and dopamine that they have been conditioned since childhood to interpret as chemistry or passion or intensity. So they actively, unconsciously seek out what they know. The psychoanalytic term the paper uses here is repetition compulsion.
Repetition compulsion.
Yes, the nervous system violently seeks the familiar, even if the familiar is destructive and painful.
So they end up continually selecting partners who are emotionally unavailable, highly critical, unpredictable, or prone to leaving. They select people who perfectly echo their original childhood wound, hoping that this time they can fix the person and finally win the love they were denied as a child. The statistics in the research are grim. Individuals exposed to interpersonal trauma are statistically far more likely to select partners with higher levels of substance abuse, aggression, or deviant behaviors.
So, if we pull back and look at the whole picture, you have two individuals who both have high ACE scores, adverse childhood experiences. Through repetition compulsion, they are magnetically drawn to each other's trauma.
That's a perfect storm.
They enter a relationship, rapidly cycle through stage 1 and stage 2, and create a highly volatile, chaotic, double insecure environment. And then they have children.
Oh, wow. The trap snaps shut. They physically pass down the epigenetic markers for hypervigilance through their DNA. And then they raise those genetically primed children in a chaotic environment that perfectly triggers and reinforces those exact same epigenetic markers.
The abandonment trauma is perfectly reenacted. The cycle begins anew for the next generation. It is an airtight biological and sociological self-fulfilling prophecy.
That is incredibly heavy to process. But honestly, it is also so validating to see the mechanics of it laid out so clearly. It really drives home the mission of this paper, removing the shame from you, the listener. If you keep ending up in toxic relationships, you aren't just making stupid dating choices. You are battling millennia of evolutionary wiring, complex neuroendocrinology, and inherited epigenetic software.
And if battling your own DNA wasn't hard enough, we have to look at the macro environment we currently live in. The hypothesis moves into an examination of the systemic, cultural, and financial amplifiers of this trauma. How do our modern social systems perfectly mirror and reinforce that original childhood abandonment wound?
I really want to dig into this because this takes the cycle out of the bedroom and puts it into the boardroom and the culture at large. Let's start with gender norms and the corporate world.
Could do it.
The research discusses how, particularly for high-achieving men, childhood trauma doesn't always look like hiding in a corner. It often morphs into this relentless, obsessive drive for professional success and wealth accumulation.
Because for them, success is a form of armor. It is redemption. It's a tangible protection against the early messages they received that love is strictly conditional on performance or that resources are scarce and easily taken away.
So when these men hit the retreat phase, stage 3, that relational cycle where the intimacy gets too scary, their retreat doesn't look like packing a bag and moving to another state. It manifests as the mask of stoicism. They withdraw into severe emotional suppression and severe work-life imbalances. They become the classic workaholic.
Think about the archetype of the highly successful executive. Let's call him Dave.
Okay.
Dave works 80 hours a week. He provides massive financial resources for his family, but he is completely emotionally inaccessible to his wife and children. Dave doesn't view himself as a traumatized survivor fleeing intimacy. He categorizes his retreat as a noble need for self-sufficiency or providing for the family.
This completely changes how you look at the workaholic. It's not just pure ambition, and it's not just a toxic corporate culture, though that obviously plays a part. It is literally the abandonment cycle playing out with a corporation acting as the surrogate partner. The corporation gives them the dopamine of achievement without the terrifying vulnerability of emotional intimacy.
Exactly. And the devastating downstream effect is that while Dave might be physically present in the home on weekends, his emotional distance means he is effectively abandoning his own children's emotional needs. He's keeping the intergenerational cycle spinning while being celebrated by society for his work ethic.
The hypothesis also touches on cultural mobility, which dictates how fast this cycle spins in different parts of the world. For instance, in collectivist cultures, like many societies in East Asia, relationships are generally more stable, and relational mobility is very low. You don't just up and leave your family, your community, or your marriage easily. The social fabric is tightly woven.
Because of that tight weave, the risk of social rejection is catastrophic. If you are abandoned by your group in a collectivist culture, you don't have a vast sea of alternative relationship options waiting for you. So in those cultures, the caution phase, stage I of the cycle, is incredibly prolonged and extreme. The hypervigilance is focused on maintaining group harmony at all costs to avoid the catastrophic threat of exile.
Conversely, in highly individualist Western cultures, the hypothesis argues you see people moving much more quickly and chaotically through the cycle. Relational mobility is high. You can move to a new city, download an app, and meet 100 new people in a week. So people rush frantically into the all-in limerence phase, consume the illusion of security, and then when the anxiety hits, they quickly hit the retreat phase.
It's a fast cycle.
Yeah, serial dating and ghosting become normalized, socially acceptable ways to perpetually avoid confronting deeper feelings of unworthiness.
And we cannot discuss systemic amplifiers without addressing structural stressors that act like a giant magnifying glass on the trauma. The research delves into financial stress and the scarcity mindset. Chronic poverty and financial instability act as a form of chronic environmental stress that literally mimics the biological feeling of parental abandonment.
That makes profound sense. If you grow up in poverty, the system or the world is acting as the neglectful parent. It is failing to provide safety and resources.
So, when you grow up with financial scarcity, you develop a profound cellular fear of loss in adulthood. This perfectly explains why individuals might stay trapped in a highly toxic, abusive job or a draining one-sided relationship. To an outsider, it makes no sense. But to their nervous system, the familiar pain of a screaming boss or a neglectful partner feels safe compared to the terrifying existential risk of financial ruin.
Wow.
The threat of missing rent becomes the new other shoe dropping, triggering the exact same survival circuitry as an abandoning parent.
It's all the exact same biological hardware, just running different cultural software. And speaking of systems that amplify fear, we have to look at what the research says about religious trauma. It specifically highlights high-control religious environments that utilize fear, shame, and guilt to control the behavior of their congregations.
This is an exceptionally potent amplifier because it deals with ultimate authority. If a child is taught that God, the ultimate parent figure, loves them, but that their salvation, their safety from hell, or their inclusion in their community is strictly conditional on their absolute, unwavering obedience to complex rules, they experience what the hypothesis terms spiritual abandonment.
Love becomes fundamentally existentially conditional. You are only safe if you perform perfectly, one slip up, and you aren't just grounded, you are eternally damned.
Right. And that distorts human relational development across the board. It leads individuals to feel overly responsible for the emotions and behaviors of everyone around them. It creates an intense, agonizing baseline of hypervigilance in all social interactions.
Because the stakes are so high.
Exactly. Because in their framework, getting a relationship wrong or setting a boundary doesn't just mean a breakup. It means eternal consequence or complete excommunication from their entire social support network.
And lastly, on the macro level, we cannot forget historical and collective trauma. Wars, forced displacement, slavery, colonization. The research points out that populations who have endured these massive collective traumas, descendants of Holocaust survivors, victims of war, indigenous communities, exhibit significantly heightened levels of anxiety, hypervigilance, and depressive symptoms across multiple generations.
For these groups, the concept of the other shoe dropping isn't just an individual neurotic fear. It's a learned collective expectation validated by horrific historical reality. The narrative that the world is dangerous and will take everything from you becomes the central organizing principle for family life.
Whether the threat is an unpredictable alcoholic parent, a volatile and unforgiving capitalist economy, or a conditional high-control religion, your biological survival mechanism responds in the exact same way. It braces for the blow.
It really does.
Okay, we have covered some incredibly heavy, dark terrain today. We've gone from the microscopic methylation of your DNA receptors to the macroscopic trauma of global history.
Yeah.
And if you are listening to this, it can feel a bit suffocating. It can feel like reading a terminal diagnosis with no cure. You might be thinking, great, my brain is broken, my DNA is tagged, and society is rigged against me. But that brings us to the final and most crucial part of this research, which outlines a profoundly hopeful resolution.
Yes, the conclusion of Sartucci's hypothesis is incredibly vital. It states that while the tripartite relational cycle is overwhelmingly supported by evolutionary biology, neuroendocrinology, and epigenetics, it is absolutely not an inescapable destiny. Your biology is powerful, but it is malleable. You are not doomed to repeat this cycle forever.
The research highlights several highly effective, evidence-based interventions for breaking the chain. It mentions the intergenerational trauma treatment model, or ITTM, which specifically addresses the parent-child trauma link. It highlights somatic experiencing, which is a therapy that bypasses talking and directly helps the nervous system discharge the physical trauma trapped in the body. And narrative therapy, which helps survivors rewrite the disempowering stories they've been told about themselves.
The ultimate goal of all these therapeutic approaches is to reparent the self. It's about slowly, painstakingly updating that faulty internal relational template. It is about teaching your HPA axis that a missed text message is just a missed text message, not a saber-toothed tiger.
It is about learning to recognize that the suffocating feeling of the dropping shoe is an emotional flashback to the past. It is a memory echoing in your body. It is not a current reality. By learning to identify the flashback for what it is in the moment, survivors can begin to pause the cycle. They can interrupt the urge to strike out or run away.
And by pausing, they slowly step out of that exhausted survival mode. They allow their oxytocin system to build capacity. Healing requires replacing that deep-seated epigenetic fear with an internalized, secure base of self-worth.
It's finally turning off that faulty military-grade proximity sensor so you can actually enjoy the drive down the highway.
And I want to leave you with a final thought to really ponder, building on everything we've mapped out today. We have spent this entire segment talking about how hypervigilance makes relationships difficult, exhausting, and fragile. But think about the sheer, raw processing power of the system we just described.
It's immense.
It is. If your nervous system evolved to be this brilliantly, astoundingly hyper-calibrated, able to detect a millimeter shift in a facial expression, able to read the emotional temperature of a room the second you walk in, imagine the profound levels of deep connection, attunement, and empathy it is capable of achieving once that high-resolution sensor is finally reprogrammed to look for safety instead of danger.
That is a truly beautiful reframing. The exact same biological hardware that currently causes your panic has the potential to facilitate the most incredible, deep, empathetic connection imaginable. You don't have to destroy the machine, you just have to update the software.
Very well said.
Well, that wraps up our deep dive into the cycle of the abandoned. Thank you so much for joining us and exploring the hidden architecture of human survival with us. If this segment resonated with you, if it helped explain a cycle you've been stuck in, or if it made you think of someone who desperately needs to understand that they are not broken, please subscribe and share today in the hypothesis. Help us spread this knowledge, because maybe, just maybe, the next time things are going genuinely well in your life and you catch yourself holding your breath, waiting for that jagged white line on the x-ray, waiting for the break, waiting for that other shoe to drop, you'll take a breath, realize it's just an old echo, and understand that you are already safe.